Most people today know T-Series as the YouTube titan that took on PewDiePie, the faceless empire behind billions of views and copyright strikes. But long before the memes, before the subscriber wars, before the algorithms decided what we hear, there was a man. A man with no playback voice, no filmy surname, and no godfather. He didn't belong to Bollywood. He built his own industry on faith, hustle, and a stack of cassettes. On a muggy August morning in 1997, he followed the same ritual he had for years. But what happened next didn't just shake the music business. It exposed how far Dawood's reach had grown. This is the story of the man behind T-Series. This is the story of Gulshan Kumar Dua. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aryaan.
And I'm Aishwarya.
And the case that I have for you today is a name that you've heard of, but you don't know the full story.
I really don't know the full story, and I don't know if this is like a generational gap where T-Series doesn't remind me of any of this. It just reminds me of, like you said,
the copyright strikes we fear so much.
The whole PewDiePie thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that is, but that's how culturally inept I am at this.
And behind all of that is just a single man, Gulshan Kumar. And that fateful day, on the morning of August 12th, 1997, Gulshan Kumar followed a routine that had become second nature over the years. His mornings always began with prayer, a habit so ingrained that even the mounting threats against his life hadn't deterred him. At around 10 a.m., he left his home in Andheri West and headed towards the Jiteshwar Mahadev Mandir, a modest temple he himself had helped renovate 2 decades earlier. The red Opel Astra, his usual ride, wound through the familiar lanes of Jeetnagar. His driver, Rooplal Saroj, sat behind the wheel. But missing that day was his government-assigned bodyguard, who was reportedly sick. His name was Rajesh, an officer provided by the Uttar Pradesh police after Gulshan began receiving threats earlier that month. Without Rajesh by his side, Gulshan was exposed, but unafraid. The past few days had been anything but normal for the T-Series founder. 2 calls had come in, one on August 5th and another on August 8th, warning him to pay extortion money or face fatal consequences. Gulshan had refused. Friends and family advised caution, but Gulshan insisted that he would leave matters to God. In his mind, his faith was protection enough. Armed security, evasive routes, changing routines, these weren't things Gulshan Kumar seemed interested in. His life had always been public. His temples, his businesses, his music, his daily prayers, all visible to anyone who cared enough to watch. And that morning, somebody was watching. In the cramped streets of Jeetnagar, vendors were setting up stalls for the day. The air was sticky, heavy, and in the distance, the first sounds of the city coming to life echoed through the neighborhood. Gulshan Kumar entered the temple quietly, as he always did. Ramchandra Lavangre, the president of the temple trust, greeted him with folded hands. Gulshan spent about 15 minutes offering prayers, performing his regular rituals without haste. He had done so religiously for 20 years without fail. Naturally, to the temple staff, there was nothing unusual about the day. But outside, just beyond the protective cocoon of incense and mantras, 3 men were lying in wait. They had spent weeks studying his movements, noting the timing of his visits, the position of his car, the moments when he was most exposed. Previously, they had held back, deterred by the presence of an armed bodyguard. But today was different. Rajesh was sick. The bodyguard wasn't there. But they were. At around 10:40 a.m., Gulshan Kumar exited the temple. His driver Rooplal carried a canister filled with water from the temple, along with fruit offerings. Lavangre walked a few steps behind them. The red Opel was parked facing Navikaran Road, barely 6 feet from the temple entrance. As Gulshan approached the car, Rooplal moved ahead to open the driver's side door. But in that split second, Gulshan was alone, exposed, and within range. A man came behind him and shots were fired. Gulshan turned instinctively, but more shots rang out, striking him. Another assailant rushed in, shooting again as Gulshan staggered, seeking shelter, trying to move toward nearby chawls. Doors were slammed shut on his face. Cries of alarm rose from the narrow lanes. Bleeding, he banged on the doors, desperate, disoriented. but nobody opened. Roop Lal, seeing his employer fall, tried to intervene but was shot in both legs. Meanwhile, a third assailant emerged and continued firing at Gulshan as he struggled to stand. The area erupted into chaos. Residents screamed and fled while the three attackers calmly made their escape, first on foot, then hijacking a taxi at gunpoint. They abandoned the vehicle near Kapaswadi and melted away into the Mumbai crowds. Inside the temple compound, the pool of blood grew larger. Ramchandra managed to drag Gulshan into the backseat of the Opel, but with Rooplar incapacitated, he had to hail a bystander, a man named Rajesh Johari, a rickshaw rider who drove them to Cooper Hospital. But at that moment, as neighbors peeked cautiously from behind closed doors, as the temple bell swung gently in the disturbed air, Gulshan Kumar's fate still hung precariously in the balance. But to understand why bullets rang out in Jeetnagar that morning, we need to rewind the cassette tape. Not just a few days or weeks, but decades, to the small crowded lanes of Delhi where a young boy stood behind a fruit juice stall, handing over glasses of orange juice to customers without ever quite meeting their eyes. Delhi, 1950s. The air smells of coal, smoke and dust. Street vendors call out for customers as cycles and handcarts move past. In one corner of Daryaganj, a young boy stands behind a fruit juice stall, wiping glasses with an old cloth. His name is Gulshan Dua. He's born in 1951. He's not a star yet. He isn't even Gulshan Kumar, the name that millions would one day chant. Here, in the Delhi heat of the 1960s, he's Gulshan Dua, the son of Chandraban Dua, a refugee from West Punjab, one of the countless families uprooted by the partition. They don't have much. A shop small enough to fit inside a garage. A daily life that revolves around survival. Nothing comes easy. Every rupee counts. Gulshan doesn't spend his mornings in school uniforms or playgrounds. By the time he finishes the 10th grade, school is way behind him. Work takes over. He knows the price of fruits by weight, how to spot a good orange, how to stretch a sale. But even at this young, tender age, something else pulls at his attention. Music. It plays from the radios perched on pawn shops, the loudspeakers outside temples, from battery-powered record players in rich Delhi homes. Songs slip into the narrow streets of old Delhi like a second language everyone understands. Gulshan watches, listens, learns. He notices the way customers hum along Mohammed Rafi's voice without realizing. In a city bruised by migration and poverty, music is a kind of medicine. And at first it's background noise, but then it's a business idea. Sometime in his teens, the family stall adds a second offering, records and cassettes. It's not a formal expansion. It happens because Gulshan notices something simple. Music sells faster than fruit. He starts taking charge of the new line. He watches what people ask for, not just the latest film hits, but devotional songs too. Bhajans, aartis, naats. There's a demand for songs that aren't about heroes and heroines. Songs that people pray with, celebrate with, mourn with. Family friends later recall Gulshan as quiet but focused. Quote, even when other boys played cricket or loitered around, he stuck close to the shop, says one acquaintance from the old neighborhood. Quote, he wanted to understand what made people buy one cassette over another. End quote. No big speeches, no grand dreams just yet. Just a teenager noticing what sells, and a quiet decision taking shape. If music moves people, it can move his future too. In the early 1970s, Delhi is a city caught between two faces, the old world of bazaars and bylanes, and the new world of ambitions fed by industrial growth. In one corner of this changing city, Gulshan Kumar makes a quiet decision that will change his life. He stops seeing the family's small cassette shop as just a shop. He starts seeing it as a beginning. At first, the business is simple. Gulshan sources cassettes from major labels, Polydor, HMV, and sells them at lower prices to neighborhood customers. He stacks devotional albums on the front shelves, film music, ghazals, bhajans, anything that has an audience. He knows what sells, and more importantly, he knows what people wish they could buy if only it were affordable. You see, sometime around the mid-70s, Gulshan begins recording cassettes on his own. The equipment is basic. A few tape decks, blank cassettes, and a small rented room. Much like how we started this podcast. A few mics, a simple home. He records local singers covering popular songs. Sometimes classic bhajans, sometimes the latest Bollywood hits. It isn't legal. Not fully, but it isn't rare either. Across India, hundreds of small-time duplicators are doing the same thing, driven by the weak copyright enforcement and a surging appetite for cheap music. The difference is, Gulshan does it better. He pays attention to recording quality. He designs simple, recognizable cassette covers, ones you still remember to this date. He keeps his prices low, often half of what the big labels charge. If the standard cassette sells at Rs 36, Gulshan sells it at 20, sometimes even Rs 15. It makes the difference between a family buying a cassette or walking away. He names his company Super Cassettes Industries.
Aryaan, even just that name screams ambition to me, you know. How you choose to, with what grandiose and with what ambition you choose to name something that is near and dear to your heart. And this name just screams that to me.
Yeah,
it seems like he didn't view it
there
as
was
just
nothing
another.
super or industrious about
I
it just
bet,
yet.
but it's just his view of it. Yeah.
But I really find it fascinating that the quality of the product is what he focused on, which differentiated him from the rest of the pack. And, I like projecting our own methodology of building Desi crime in the heyday. I have nowhere near the money Gulshan eventually made and don't want that fate. No. But it's just cool to see the beginnings of an entrepreneur.
And so all of this money that he was losing out on, I guess, by pricing his cassettes cheaper, where was he compensating for the cost of that money?
By the cost of production. Because it was piracy.
Right, okay.
And then low cost of production.
Understood. Right. So he was just making more cassettes. Got it.
Super Cassettes Industries is a grand name for what is, in reality, a tiny operation with no marketing team, no boardroom, no legal department. Just Gulshan, a few assistants, and a dream. By 1977, cassette culture is exploding across India. You see those Japanese 2-in-1 radios flood the market, brought home by workers returning from the Gulf. Cassettes are now portable, durable, and cheap. In villages where cinema halls are still a luxury, people now have music in their homes. Weddings, religious functions, public fairs, everywhere, that small black cassette becomes essential. Gulshan sees it happening and moves fast. He doesn't wait for distributors to find him. He goes out to them. He builds relationships with shopkeepers, wholesalers, street vendors. If a tape is defective, he replaces it without argument. If a vendor struggles to pay upfront, Gulshan offers credit. People remember that. In an industry dominated by stiff executives in Mumbai and Kolkata, Gulshan Kumar is the man who you can call directly. The man who shows up with stock when you need it. The man who listens. He expands his catalogue. Now, not just Bollywood music, but religious recordings like the Ramayana Path, Hanuman Chalisa, Sikh Kirtans, Islamic Naats, Christian hymns. He releases albums nobody else bothers to produce because the profit margin seems too small. But Gulshan understands, in India, faith never goes out of fashion. He hires local singers for cheap, unknown names, willing to record devotional songs for a few hundred rupees. And he floods the market. Every shop that sells cassettes soon carries Gulshan Kumar's tapes. And by the early 1980s, Super Cassettes is making serious money. In no time, T-Series is born. The T in the name stands for Trishul, one of Gulshan's favorite religious symbols, a trident. But it's marketed simply T for tape, series for the endless line of releases. Unlike the polished marketing machines of Polydor and HMV, T-Series is scrappy. Its tapes don't come in glossy packaging, its artists aren't movie stars, but it is everywhere. Gulshan doesn't chase glamour, he chases volume. And it works. In small towns from Meerut to Patna, in dusty bazaars and village fairs, T-Series becomes a household name. And he runs this company with a tight grip. He personally listens to most recordings before they are released. He personally approves the cassette covers. And he personally negotiates deals with shopkeepers. Gulshan's a workhorse, working 7 days a week, often late into the night. And his office is in Noida, which is a modest office but bustling. Workers say he is demanding but fair. He wants quality, he wants speed, but he pays on time. Quote, he was a hard man to say no to, a distributor once said in an interview. If you hesitated, he'd just smile and say, don't worry, take it, you'll sell them all. And he was usually right, end quote. Gulshan also reinvests profits back into the business, upgrading recording equipment, expanding warehouses, building relationships with transporters who can deliver cassettes deep into rural India. By the mid-80s, T-Series owns hundreds of master tapes, original devotional recordings, folk albums, remix compilations. The big music companies just watch in growing alarm. And by the late 1980s, Gulshan takes an even bigger gamble. Cover versions. Indian copyright law allows anyone to re-record a song after 3 years of its original release, provided a royalty is paid to the original copyright holder. Gulshan uses this loophole aggressively. He re-records hit Bollywood songs using new, cheaper singers. He packages these albums at lower prices and floods the market before the original labels can react. Sometimes he doesn't even wait for the 3-year period, risking legal action. Competitors are furious. Quote, you're killing the industry, one executive tells him during a meeting in Chennai in 1997. Gulshan shrugs. The public decide what sells, he says. Lawsuits follow. Court battles drag on. But Gulshan is always 3 steps ahead. By 1990, T-Series controls nearly 60% of India's cassette market. He has built a music empire. Not through connections or glamour, but through relentless hustle. And he doesn't stop at cassettes. he enters film production, a risky, expensive business. His logic is simple. If he owns the film, he owns the music rights too. T-Series produces low-budget films like Bewafa Sanam and Jeena Marna Tere Sang. These films don't always succeed at the box office, but the music albums always become hits. One album, Ashiki, in 1990, changes everything. The Ashiki soundtrack with songs by Nadeem Shravan becomes one of the highest-selling Bollywood albums of all time. T-Series becomes a giant overnight in the eyes of the world. But only he knows the days of selling orange juice and listening to Mohammed Rafi tracks that led to this moment. He understands that the future is in owning content, not renting, not licensing, owning. He invests in studios, recording equipment, duplication plant. By 1997, T-Series is a whopping $90 million company. It holds rights to over 18,000 audio tracks and 2,000 video albums. From a fruit juice vendor's son to the king of Indian music, Gulshan Kumar had rewritten the rules of the game. But success brings shadows. Not everyone is happy. Old music companies accuse him of piracy and unfair business practices. New entrants fear his dominance. And in the shadows, Underworld figures notice a business growing too big, too fast, and refusing to pay protection money. But Gulshan Kumar keeps moving, as he always has, fast, forward, with faith that hard work will protect him. He doesn't know that the forces gathering against him are no longer competitors. There's something darker, and they are closing in. By the early 1990s, Gulshan Kumar's business had outgrown Delhi. The next frontier was Bombay. It wasn't just the heart of India's entertainment industry, it was where dreams were made or broken. But stepping into Bombay wasn't like expanding into another city. It meant entering a different world altogether, one where success came with invisible costs. Bombay wasn't Delhi. The pace was faster, the stakes higher, and the streets heavier with fear you couldn't always see, but could always feel. Beneath the glitz of Marine Drive and the glamour of Bollywood premieres, there was another Bombay. A Mumbai run by men whose names were whispered, not spoken. Men who control not just the black market and smuggling networks, but also real estate, politics, and increasingly the world Gulshan was about to fully step into, the film and music business. The Underworld's hold on Bollywood had begun decades earlier, but by the 80s and 90s, it was impossible to ignore. Dawood Ibrahim, operating from Dubai, had built D Company into a sprawling criminal empire. Financing movies became one of their many sidelines. For filmmakers who couldn't secure bank loans, the quick cash offered by the Underworld came with no questions asked, until it was time to pay. Producers took money to complete films. Actors attended lavish parties thrown by men who carried invisible power. Roles were influenced. Casting choices sometimes dictated at gunpoint. If a producer hesitated, a quiet visit or a late night call usually settled the matter. Newspapers occasionally carried reports of shooting outside suburban offices or unexplained beatings in film studios. But most of Bollywood stayed silent. Careers were at stake. So were lives. The reach wasn't limited to financing. Distribution networks were influenced. Protection money was demanded. Pirated VHS copies of new films flooded markets before the originals hit theaters, often with the blessing or direct involvement of syndicates. Even the biggest names in the industry couldn't stay untouched. Films like Chori Chori Chupke Chupke would later become infamous for being bankrolled by underworld figures. Producers faced threats over casting decisions. Some actors quietly left India for long vacations when extortion threats became too loud. By the mid-90s, this reality wasn't hidden anymore. It was accepted, lived with, and feared.
So Aryaan, this is a reality of Bollywood that I feel like we've heard of for very, very long now. And I've always kind of understood the workings of it, but never fully understood the motivations of the underworld. What is it just another way of making money? What is the motivation of this specific industry? What does it bring them to influence casting choices?
Two big things. One is films, if they do well, have asymmetric returns, which means a small investment leads to an outsized outcome.
Which is the money logic.
The second is it helps in money laundering, black money. A lot of a film's production back then especially could have easily been paid off with black money. So instead of real estate, which is another place where people put their black money in, money that isn't accounted for, films were another place to do so. So these were two. I think the third would also be, I think any mafioso individual yearns for glamour, yearns to be associated with those people, yearns to have their image cleaned and not be viewed as from the streets, because that's the whole, one of the main story arc. And I think it allows them to jump several ladders
social
up
ladders.
the social ladder. Yeah. And this isn't just hearsay. In fact, in court documents, Preeti Zinta, who was in that film that was allegedly funded by the Underworld, talks about the haunting calls she used to get at nights. Bombay's glittering skyline was just a veil. Beneath it was a city where ambition and fear grew together, where movie sets were sometimes built with money that had blood on it, and where every big success carried a question: who was backing it? For Gulshan Kumar, Bombay offered opportunity on a scale Delhi never could. The size of the market, the access to film soundtracks, the chance to dominate not just devotional and regional music, but mainstream Hindi cinema itself. It was all here. But so were the dangers that came with refusing to bend to the rules that had been laid down long before he arrived. He was entering a city where success wasn't just about strategy anymore. It was about survival. And success had always been Gulshan Kumar's armor. In Delhi, it had protected him, made him too useful, too respected to be dragged down. But Bombay was different. Here, success could make you a target faster than it made you a hero. By 1996, T-Series wasn't just another player in the music business. It had become the player. T-Series. The company's reach extended across India. His catalogue was unmatched and his pricing crushed competitors. And he had done all of this without paying tribute to the unspoken powers that controlled the city. The refusal wasn't just unusual, it was dangerous. For the Bombay underworld, businesses like T-Series weren't just successful, they were valuable assets waiting to be tapped. Extortion had long been a part of the city's undercurrent. Protection money wasn't optional, it was a tax imposed by invisible hands, collected with threats first, bullets later if needed. Dawood Ibrahim's D Company had made this a fine art, and by the mid-90s, D Company wasn't just a gang, it was an institution operating out of Dubai but with loyal networks across India. Gulshan Kumar first came onto their radar when he began refusing small but persistent demands. Contributions to charity fronts that everyone knew weren't really charities. Investments in films nobody would ever watch. Sponsorships for events that came with too many strings attached. Most industry veterans quietly paid and moved on. But Gulshan did not. Friends would later say it wasn't arrogance. It was just his belief that doing the right thing would protect him. But that faith would be tested in the worst way. By early 1997, the signals became harder to ignore. Anonymous calls to his Delhi office, whispers from acquaintances in Bombay warning him to be careful. People who once casually invited him to parties started advising him to travel with security. Gulshan, for his part, remained unmoved. He did add a bodyguard to his daily routine, Rajesh, an officer assigned by the UP police, but otherwise changed little about his life. He continued to visit temples every morning. He continued to walk the streets of Jeetnagar without an entourage. He continued to run T-Series with the same tight control as always, listening to every bhajan recording before release, signing off on cassette covers personally, obsessing over distribution plans. The first direct threats came in the form of phone calls. On August 5th and again on August 8th, 1997, Gulshan Kumar received calls demanding extortion money. And the amount wasn't small, several crores. The caller didn't mince words. Pay or there would be consequences. The demands were allegedly linked to Abu Salim, a key lieutenant of Dawood Ibrahim, known for his role in bringing Bollywood under D Company's thumb. According to police reports later, Gulshan Kumar's name had been added to a growing list of targets, producers, financiers, actors who had defied the new rules of the game. By the summer of 1997, Gulshan's refusal to bow to extortion demands had placed him in the crosshairs of a different set of men whose world operated by different rules. At the center of this plot was Abdul Rauf Merchant, known on the streets and today as Raja. His name wouldn't mean much yet to the public, but in the bylanes of Bombay's crime world, Raja had earned quite a reputation. Quiet, unremarkable, and deadly when needed. Raja wasn't alone though. Alongside him were Abdul Rashid and Muhammad Ali, foot soldiers, sharpshooters, and lookouts rolled into one. They weren't infamous legends like Dawood Ibrahim or Abu Salim. They were the next rung down, the men who did what had to be done when instructions were filtered down through phone calls from safe houses and overseas hideouts. The assignment was clear. Gulshan Kumar had refused to pay. He had to be made an example. The planning wasn't rushed. Bombay didn't work like that. When an operation involved someone as high profile as Gulshan, patience was key. For weeks, Raja and his men shadowed him. They knew his habits better than some of his own staff. They watched him leave his home in Andheri West every morning, a simple man stepping into a red Opel Astra. They timed how long he spent inside the Jiteshwar Mahadev Mandir. They noted when he was accompanied by a bodyguard, and more importantly, when he wasn't. Each day, notes were made. When did he pray? Did he linger after offering water to the Shiva idol? Was the bodyguard armed and alert or distracted? Did local residents recognize him and gather around, or did he move unnoticed? They mapped out every detail to the T. The temple surroundings, the narrowness of the streets outside, the nearest exits, they knew that the mornings were best. When the temple was mostly empty, the lanes quiet, the noise of Bombay still stretching itself awake. The problem for weeks was the bodyguard. Rajesh was a silent shadow, always a few steps behind Gulshan. An attack risked immediate gunfire, capture, or worse, failure. So they waited. Some days Abdul Merchant grew impatient. Friends would later recount how restless he became during those weeks, chain smoking, fidgeting, venting in low voices to Abdul Rashid and Muhammad Ali about how the job was taking too long. But orders were clear. No mistakes. If Gulshan Kumar was to be hit, it had to be final, clean, public. And then came the break they had been waiting for. In early August, word filtered back through their network. Rajesh, the bodyguard, had fallen sick. For the first time in weeks, Gulshan Kumar might be unprotected. It wasn't confirmed, but it was enough. 2 warning calls were placed to Gulshan directly, the same ones on August 5th and August 8th. Demands were repeated. Pay up or face consequences. The calls were traced later to men connected to Abu Salim's network operating under Dawood's umbrella. At the time, Gulshan refused to change his behavior. He kept praying, kept visiting the temple, and the threats in his mind were just noise he did not need to dignify. But for Abdul Merchant, they were the final green light. The plan for the morning of August 12th was simple and brutal. One shooter would approach as Gulshan left the temple. Another would provide backup, ensuring Gulshan had no escape. A third would cover their exit. The weapons had already been sourced. Small, easily concealed pistols, perfect for close range. They didn't need rifles. They didn't need drama. 16 bullets would speak loud enough. The night before the attack, the 3 men gathered in an unmarked chawl in Dongri. No elaborate meeting, no long discussions, just a final check. Guns loaded, movements rehearsed, timing set. At 9 am on August 12th, they took position near the Jiteshwar Mahadev Mandir. The morning was humid. The streets slick from the monsoon rains. Vendors set up their stalls. Stray dogs slept curled in the doorways. The city around them was waking up. But here, in this small pocket of Mumbai, everything felt suspended. Slowed. Inside the temple, Gulshan Kumar prayed. Hands folded, head bowed. A routine he had followed every morning for decades. Outside, Raja and his men watched from a distance, blending into the half-formed crowd of shopkeepers and early risers. At 10:40 am, Gulshan stepped out of the temple. His driver opened the door of his car as he stood exposed. The first shooter approached quietly, walking with purpose. At close range, he muttered a line recalled by witnesses. "Bahut puja kar li, ab upar jaake karna. You've prayed enough. Now go pray upstairs." The first shot tore through the morning air. Then another. And then another. Gulshan staggered, bleeding, trying instinctively to find cover. He stumbled through the chawls, knocking on doors that stayed shut. The residents, fearing involvement, turned their faces away. Ruplal tried to intervene but was shot in both legs. Gulshan was fired upon again, this time by the second gunman who was closed in. 16 shots in total. 16 bangs. And the 3 men fled quickly, hijacking a taxi at gunpoint. And within minutes, they had vanished into the chaos of Bombay, leaving behind a half-conscious body, a city in shock, and a music emperor breathing his last breath. The red Opel Astra tore through the lanes of Andheri West, its tires splashing through monsoon puddles, carrying a man bleeding out in the backseat. Gulshan Kumar now lay slumped and silent. His long-time temple acquaintance, Ramchandra Lavangre, sat beside him, shouting at the driver to go faster. But the man behind the wheel wasn't Gulshan's usual driver. You see, Ruplal had just been shot. Instead, it was Rajesh Johari, a random rickshaw rider who happened to be near the temple when the chaos erupted. Ramchandra had pulled him aside in desperation, pressed the car keys into his hands, and ordered him to drive the wounded music mogul to safety. Ahead of them, Cooper Hospital's emergency team had already been alerted. A police constable who witnessed the shooting had called ahead, warning that a critically injured man was being rushed in. Doctors and nurses rushed out as the battered red car screeched to a halt. Gulshan was carried inside, blood soaking through the makeshift sheet they had wrapped around him. His eyes were barely open, his breathing shallow. Labored. His body riddled with bullet wounds was shutting down. Inside the emergency room, attempts were made. CPR, adrenaline shots, blood transfusions. Ruplal Saroj, the driver who had been shot himself, sat on a nearby wheelchair, sobbing uncontrollably. Within minutes, the attending physician pronounced the words that would ripple across India. Brought dead. At exactly 11:15 a.m. on August 12, 1997, Gulshan Kumar was declared dead at Cooper Hospital. News breaks, and it doesn't take long. Within hours, TV channels began flashing the news. In the days before WhatsApp forwards, the power of word of mouth and breaking television coverage was even more potent. Outside Cooper Hospital, a crowd had gathered. Some fans, some journalists, many simple, curious bystanders drawn by the scent of tragedy. Cameramen jostled for position, reporters shoved microphones into faces, ambulance sirens bled. At T-Series' office in Noida, stunned employees broke down crying at their desks. Across Delhi, musicians, singers, and film producers paused mid-conversation as the news reached them. The man who had changed the soundscape of India was gone, and gone violently. Immediately tributes poured in. Anuradha Podwal, the playback singer whose career had been revived by Gulshan Kumar's relentless promotion of devotional music, reportedly collapsed when she heard the news. Nadeep Shravan, the composer duo behind the Ashiki soundtrack, issued a joint statement, quote, "We have lost a mentor, a friend, a force bigger than life itself." End quote. Even Bollywood personalities who had once clashed with Gulshan Kumar over business practices expressed shock and sorrow. He was remembered not just for his business acumen, but for his personal humility, his preference for white, simple kurta pajamas over designer suits, his habit of folding his hands and greeting even when speaking to the smallest cassette shop owner. Thousands attended his funeral. The line stretched for hours outside the home in Delhi. The T-Series flag flew at half-mast. But amidst the mourning, there was fear. Fear that Gulshan Kumar's murder was not an isolated tragedy, but that it was the beginning of something darker. DN Nagar police station was already buzzing by the time the ambulance carrying Gulshan Kumar's body was pulled away from Cooper Hospital. Inside the station's plain walls, phones rang off the hook. Television crews had started camping outside. Flashing headlines of the music mogul's assassination across India were blared even before the ink had dried up on the initial report. Senior Inspector Rashmi Jadhav, one of the first officers to respond at Cooper, sat at her desk, typing the first words of case number 572, 1997, a homicide investigation unlike any the station had ever seen. The first formal complaint was registered barely 2 hours after Gulshan's death. Under the dusty yellow lights of the station, witnesses gave hurried, shell-shock statements. Ramchandra, the temple trust president, recounted seeing Gulshan collapse, bloody and confused, outside the temple. Ruplal Saroj, the wounded driver, gave what little he could remember before being sedated for surgery. 2 fruit vendors described seeing 3 men loitering near the temple before the attack, faces obscured. Senior officers knew immediately that this wasn't a crime of passion or a random mugging. The precision of the attack, the multiple shooters, the getaway, it reeked of professional planning. Within hours, the case was handed over to a special task force led by who else but Deputy Commissioner of Police Rakesh Maria, a rising star in the Mumbai police. If you know Desi crime, you know we are Rakesh Maria fans. Alongside him was Assistant Commissioner of Police Sanjay Pandya and Inspector Nitin Patil, veterans of the city's brutal crime wars within the underworld. The first order Maria issued was simple: lock down the crime scene. The temple courtyard, splattered with blood, was cordoned off by noon. Spent shells were recovered, 9mm bullets matching typical gangster weaponry used by street-level sharpshooters. CCTVs weren't widespread in Mumbai yet, but nearby shops with private cameras yielded grainy footage. A glimpse of 2 figures walking briskly from the temple area minutes after the shooting. Rakesh Maria moved fast. Word was already circulating that Dawood Ibrahim's network might be involved. Extortion demands made against Gulshan Kumar days earlier pointed directly toward Abu Salim. But Salim was beyond reach in Dubai. The immediate task was finding the men who had pulled the trigger. Within 48 hours, the crime branch picked up whispers from its network of informants. A small-time associate, nervous after seeing the media frenzy, dropped a name: Abdul Rauf Merchant, alias Raja. Merchant was known to the police as a street-level enforcer with aspirations of climbing higher. He wasn't a boss, he wasn't a mastermind, but boy was he loyal, efficient, and deadly. When police raided a bar in Dongri where Raja was often spotted, he had already vanished. The manhunt widened. Surveillance units shadowed Raja's known associates. Raids were conducted in Dongri, Bhendi Bazaar, and Nalasopara. Mumbai's underworld, sensing the heat, went underground. But then came the break the investigators needed. Just a few days later, on August 24th, 12 days after the murder, Abdul Rauf Merchant, Urf Raja, was caught at a safe house in the crowded alleys of Dongri. When the police team burst through the door, Raja reportedly did not resist. He knew the game was over. In custody, facing relentless interrogation by Inspector Nitin Patil and others, Raja cracked. According to the confessional statement later quoted in the court document, Raja admitted, quote, "We had been instructed that Gulshan Kumar must be eliminated. He had refused to comply with demands. His death was to be a message," end quote. But Raja did not work alone. Within hours of his arrest, police picked up his brother, Abdul Rashid Daoud Merchant, another key player who had helped coordinate logistics on the day of the killing. During searches of their homes, investigators found 2 pistols wrapped in cloth and hidden under floorboards, matching the ballistics of the bullets recovered at the scene. The police methodically reconstructed the attack. Abdul Rauf Merchant had fired the first 2 shots, ambushing Gulshan Kumar as he approached his car. Abdul Rashid had followed to ensure Gulshan couldn't escape, and a third man, Muhammad Ali, had acted as backup. Together, they hijacked a taxi at gunpoint after the shooting, switching vehicles twice to lose any potential tail. In court documents later, Additional Sessions Judge M.L. Tahiliani noted, quote, "The sequence of actions undertaken by the accused exhibits a degree of planning, training and synchronization not seen in crimes of spontaneous violence," end quote. The investigation now spread outward. Phone records were subpoenaed, calls traced from payphones near Gulshan Kumar's office, and Temple revealed attempts made to intimidate him days before his death. Witnesses, including close aides and employees at T-Series, testified about the extortion threats that had been casually dismissed, threats that now loom large in retrospect. A particularly chilling moment in court came when the prosecution revealed that the shooters had stalked Gulshan for weeks, noting his routines, his prayer timings, and most damningly, the occasional absence of his government-provided bodyguard. They had waited day after day until that day when Rajesh had called in sick. It was then that the green light had been given. Prosecutor presented recovered call transcripts between Abu Salim's associates and contacts in Mumbai, discussing the quote problem that needed to be sorted. Though circumstantial, the weight of evidence made the motive clear. Raja, seated in the dock, showed little emotion as the evidence mounted. During one cross-examination, when asked why he had targeted a man like Gulshan Kumar, Raja reportedly muttered under his breath, "Hukum, hukum hota hai. Orders are orders." At the trial's climax, Judge Tahiliani, in his final ruling, declared, quote, "Gulshan Kumar Dua's death was not the result of individual grievance, but an organized effort by criminal syndicates to assert control through fear. The accused acted not out of personal hatred, but as agents of a corrupt system that threatened not just individuals, but civil order itself." End quote. Abdul Rauf Merchant was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder under Section 302 of the IPC and given additional sentences under the Arms Act. His brother Abdul Rashid was also convicted, though Muhammad Ali, the third shooter, managed to flee and evade capture for years. But inside DN Nagar police station, there was no sense of triumph when the case closed. Investigators like Rakesh Maria and Rashmi Jadhav knew the deeper truth. They had caught the shooters, but not the system that created them. Abu Salim remained abroad, protected by the foreign laws and political inertia. Dawood Ibrahim continued to run D Company from a safe distance, and continues to till this day. Today, T-Series stands as a colossus in global pop culture, a company valued at over $500 million, helming one of the world's largest YouTube channel with more than 250 million subscribers, beating giants like PewDiePie in an online battle that captured the imagination of an entire generation. Its name is now woven into the fabric of digital life, beloved for its vast library of Bollywood hits, infamous for copyright tracks that have become meme fodder across the internet. Yet behind this empire, behind the numbers, the lawsuits, the viral battles, lies the simple, stubborn story of a boy from Delhi. A boy who once stood behind a fruit juice stall, who noticed that people bought music faster than they bought oranges. A boy who turned cassettes into prayers, prayers into songs, and songs into a business that even bullets couldn't destroy.
If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Kadak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.